program. We certainly appreciate the chance to share our experience with the Larimer County's SBDC's community of members. So thank you very much for having us. I also just want to start with a comment on the fires that we're all dealing with. I am certain that since this is a Larimer County-based show, we know that probably several of you have been impacted and affected. Our thoughts are with you. We hope that everything gets cleaned up quickly and we can put a handle on these fires, but it's been difficult. So our thoughts there. Quick bio for me. I'm Don Hobbs. I'm in my 53rd year of living in Colorado, and I'm about to enter my 10th year as a broker with Front Range Business. I previously sold 3 of my own businesses. I also worked in the corporate world for many years. And so in doing that, as a broker, I've interacted with hundreds of sellers and their businesses. I've handled inquiries from thousands of buyers. And I think that this program that we're doing today, it's really a distillation of those experiences. And so hopefully what we're bringing forward here is something that's going to be useful to you as either a buyer or a seller as you look to move forward with your plans. Let me take a minute. I want to introduce my presenting partner and also my broker partner, Don Taylor. Don, can you give a quick bio on yourself?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Don. And we mirror the thoughts and the prayers for everybody up in Larimer County. Our family lives up here. We're in the Windsor-Fort Collins area. So one of the positives that is coming out of this time is seeing the community come together and help each other. So anyway, hang in there and together we'll get through it. So just a little background on me. So 30 years of business ownership, buying, building, selling companies in the private, even franchised, and at one point in the public sector. So like Don, I'm a listing agent, right? And so our clients are those that are selling their companies. But what you'll learn through this process today is we really spend most of our time working with buyers and being helpful to them and supportive to them. And we do that through an educational process to make sure that buyers get everything that they need to make a well-informed decision. I've been a business broker full-time over 10 years. I've kind of lost track of how many people I've helped do that, but I do it because I love it. And honestly, I didn't have someone like that on the front end to help me. If I would have come across a Don Hobbs, my world would have been a lot easier a long time ago. So I've spent a lot of my brokerage career working on the buy side, so I'm going to take that role today. Don's really going to take the side of the sellers and what that looks like. I'm going to play the coach in the role of the buy side to try to help our folks that are looking to buy a business through that, as well as sellers understand what that looks like. So, Don, thank you for the opportunity, and Becky, we're glad to be with you this morning, and let's get to it.
Great. Thank you. Thanks very much. So one thing I would just want to add, you likely will have questions, and so those may come up at any time during the program. If you could just put that question out through the chat feature, then we'll be able to see it and we'll be able to respond to it. Don Taylor, just to let you know, I may or may not have the chat feature pop up on my screen, so I may be relying on you to notice the questions and answer those.
Yeah, and I actually don't either. I don't know, Becky, if that's something that you do.
I definitely have the chat on so I
Okay.
can let you guys know when there is something.
Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. So just a quick introduction on today's program. We are looking at this, as Don mentioned, from a buyer and seller side. So there are 9 steps that we've identified that all business transactions are going to need to go through to get to the finish line of closing it out. But at all 9 of those steps, amazingly, there's something that the buyer needs to be doing and something that the seller needs to be doing. So we're going to be looking at it that way. I also want to emphasize that this is really an introduction. We can't do a complete how-to in the course of just 9 minutes. So, or in the course of 90 minutes. So those 9 steps, we'll let you know what's going on, but to really dig in, it takes more time than that. Let's see. And wouldn't you know, those slides just disappeared for me.
Oh no.
I'm not sure where they went.
Let me make sure, Don. I apologize, everybody. Let me make sure we get that back.
It could just be my screen setup, but
Okay.
I am not seeing slides.
Hopefully this will bring it back for us.
I now
Yep.
see slides.
Excellent.
Good. Very small ones. There we go. Larger. Okay. Good. Okay. All transactions are going to be a little different. So these 9 steps are a bit generic, but that's the way it is. And then also want to just emphasize, Don, if you could pop back just 1 second there.
Sorry about that.
Emphasize, there are a lot of moving parts in a transaction. So encourage people to recognize upfront. You're going to need to be flexible. You're going to need to compromise. And you can't be in too big a hurry, as you'll see as we put this together. A business transaction could take 4 months to over a year. So let's go to step 1. Let's jump right in. We call this step 1 is the initial exploration phase. Haven't listed a business yet, haven't looked at it, but if you're the seller, it's time to come to terms with how ready you are to sell. And one of the things we know is that sellers typically don't decide that they want to leave their business if they're young enough, active enough, the business is generating profits, and there's no big thing that's changed. It's when something changes that sellers really say they want to sell. And that thing that could change could be a spouse relocating. It could be retirement coming up. It could be something else. But being ready to sell is coming to terms with that and also understanding what you plan to do after the sale. And it's amazing. It's not an easy question to answer sometimes. And we see sellers that sometimes take up to 3 years to get through the process of determining if they're ready to sell. You don't just wake up one morning typically and say, I'm ready to make that happen. So what do sellers need to do when they've decided I am ready to sell, or I'm certainly ready to explore selling? What do sellers want? They want to know what their business is worth. They want to know what the selling process looks like. And they need to make a decision about whether or not they want to use a broker. Certainly, that's a seller's choice to use a broker or not use a broker. But a business transaction is complicated. Sellers typically have never done it before. They've run their businesses, but they've never sold their businesses. And so the vast majority of sellers will go and talk to brokers to make that determination of whether or not they want to use one. And that's a really important thing. And we encourage all sellers to do that. Go to a group of brokers, go to multiple brokers, ask them what they do, how they run their business, what their value proposition is, and use that to make a decision for yourself as to whether or not you want to use a broker. But sellers, step 1 for you is just determining, has the time arrived to sell my business? Don, I'm going to kick it back to you, see what the buyers are up to.
Awesome. Yeah. So really two of the most important pieces of this puzzle for sellers and for buyers is timing and motivation. Because those are going to be your drivers. Those are going to be your support system. If the timing's not right on either side, you need to wait, because this is a lot of work. It's a lot of work to package up and sell. It's a lot of work to prepare yourself to be a buyer and see it through and acquire a company, take it over and be successful. So timing, why right now? I start with that with everybody I talk with, and motivation. Why sell or why buy a business? And so the first questions for the buy side that we need to ask ourselves is, really, what is it that we want? And if the answer is, I don't know, I'm open to whatever, that's not going to serve you well on the buy side. That, there's an old saying, like, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. When brokers hear that, listing brokers hear that, whatever, I'm just kind of looking at anything, that tells us that the buyer's really not very prepared. That they really don't know what they want, and we're going to have to spend some more time helping them sort themselves out. But from a buyer's perspective, you can do that on your own and get yourself race ready. So you're only spending time looking at things that really fit what you're after. So let's start with establishing your unique search criteria. Very important. And I'll tell you, having done this for a long time, it's about characteristics. Everybody wants access to the finance. Just give me the numbers and I'll let you know if it's worth my time to look at. That's a huge red flag. If you're not looking at the characteristics of this business, what's the employee model? Where is it located? What's the ownership model? What's my role going to be in this business? How am I, the buyer, going to positively impact this company that I'm buying? How much time am I going to invest in it? Those are characteristics. And there's a long list of characteristics that you really should be aware of to help you build your own search criteria. So very important. Your role as the owner, very, very important. This is not a job we're taking at a company, at a corporate office. This is a business we're going to own, and the buck stops with us, the buyer. Once we buy it, it stops with us. So we need to figure out what our role is and how we're going to help, and we need to understand how much time we are really prepared to spend in this business we're looking to buy.
Great. So let's assume that buyer and seller have progressed through step one. Buyer has kind of gotten a good handle on what they're looking to acquire and why. And a seller has come to the place where, yep, now is the time is right. So this is where the rubber's going to really start to meet the road. And both parties are going to show commitment about making their objectives happen here. So we're also going to assume that a seller is going to use a broker. And they make the choice of who that broker is going to be, and they enter into a listing agreement. So just briefly on the listing agreement, if you've been involved in a real estate transaction, you know that there is an exclusive broker who gets involved to list and sell that property for you. And same thing when you're listing and selling a business. There's an exclusive broker relationship, and it's set for a period of time. And
What briefing?
whoop, we have somebody there in the background. And so, the broker and the seller have discussed the pricing. They've settled on a value that will reward the seller with the best price, bring the maximum number of buyers to the table. And that's really what getting into that listing agreement is all about. And then you go to market preparation. So if you had a listing agreement and you said, okay, we're going to offer this business for sale, but you had not done the work to prepare the business and prepare the marketing package that goes with that, when you have buyers that show up and that are interested in this business and you don't have anything to share with them or any story to tell about why this is a great business, why it's priced the way it is, it's going to make it very, very difficult to get buyers interested in that. So the selling package is the marketing side. It's going to include a confidential business review, which is a packet that tells the story. Where is it located? How big is it? What are the key financials? Why is this a good investment for a buyer? And that sort of thing. This is especially valuable if a buyer isn't local, can't easily visit the business. And this confidential business review, we call the qualitative description of the business. It offers the color commentary, offers the context, as opposed to the black and white of the business, which is really the financials. So the other thing that's really important to do here is to go out and get SBA lender pre-qualifications for the business. The broker will typically arrange for this to happen, but it's a set of lenders who have looked at the financials of the business, look at the price that the business is being offered for, and they say, if you find a qualified buyer, we will get behind the lending on this business. And when you have a business that's pre-qualified by an SBA lender, you have a much stronger offer in the market. Real quickly, I want to touch on SBA and SBA lenders. This will come up a couple of times, but the SBA is not the lender. The Small Business Administration, it's a federal program. They are the guarantors of loans that regular commercial lenders that specialize in SBA loans are making. So the SBA sets some policy guidelines. They guarantee the loans, but the commercial lenders give them. So when we say SBA loans, we're talking about SBA-backed loans that commercial lenders offer. I just always like to make that clear because a lot of times folks don't know that. So that's what's going on in step two, for sellers. Don, you can take the buyer side.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, as buyers, we love when Don's listings are pre-qualified with lenders because that means that listing has it's had financial folks take a look at it, poke holes, pull strings, get back to Don with a big list of questions. What about this? What about that? The lenders are very particular and they want to protect themselves and they want to mitigate risk. So from the buy side, we like that. Okay. But we've got to make a commitment to buying, right? And we've got to get ourselves prepared to be taken seriously. Because when in our search, when we know what we're after and it comes to the market, we need to anticipate there's going to be a lot of other buyers that are, because there are a lot of other buyers that are out there that also want that business. And so if we are late to the game, if we're just sort of casually clicking and sure, just, send me the financials and we've not prepared ourselves, we don't really know what we want. We haven't made a commitment and an understanding that this is going to take some time on our part from the buy side to actually go and acquire, to be taken seriously, to receive approval to buy that business and make it happen. So it starts with a commitment to buying. We need to calculate and lock down our available funds. We have to understand some simple things like what is our liquidity and what is our net worth? Because that's going to come into play when it comes to buying a business. If that business has a lease or property involved, now we have another party to this deal who's going to, have to approve us to get a lease. So it takes a commitment to pull it off and do it right. Okay. So we need to understand our financial position and we need to understand our financing strategy. As Don mentioned, SBA is in a lot of deals, especially the deals that we work with. That $1 to $10 million range is most of what we do. The SBA is all through that. And we're going to need to be prepared to achieve an SBA loan like that. And as it says here, we've got to set a time each week to investigate. You don't want to be drugged through this process as brokers. Like if I inquire on Don's listing, he's going to be paying attention to how serious I am. And am I prepared? Do I have my own pre-qualification as a buyer? Have I spoken to SBA lenders and made sure that they vetted me? Don's business is vetted. Well, if the SBA vendors have vetted me, Don's going to recognize if I like that business for the right reasons, he's going to move me to the top of this list. And I'm going to be in the pulp. I'm going to have control over saying yes or no, that's the business for me. So I've got to be prepared to represent myself, whether it's having my resume polished up, LinkedIn profile, which is easy to do, and you can just transfer that to a resume. Understanding what my transferable skills are for said business that I'm looking into. How is that going to apply? And really, what are my qualifications? Because at the end of the day, the seller is likely going to have a list of qualified people that they're going to be choosing from. And why are they going to choose me? I need to put myself in the best position. So creating a personal financial statement is really helpful. And your lender pre-qualification is going to help you do that too. Creating a buyer profile. Who am I, right? Who am I and how am I going to pay for it? Don and I, that's one of the first two things we want to know as listing agents. Who's this buyer? And how are they going to pay for it? And our sellers want to know that too, in order to take the buyers seriously. And then as it mentions here, getting pre-qualification lender support on our buy side as well.
Great. So just, in closing on top of what Don said, and I tried to mention as well, I just really can't overestimate the importance of buyer and seller taking step two and the readiness and preparation aspects of that. That just has to be one of the most important things that are done. For buyers, it's going to make a difference. If you show that you're ready, then you'll be accepted more fully. Sellers, you have to make your business ready so that buyers step in and go, this is attractive. This is compelling. I want to know what's going on here. So I can't overemphasize it. Just stay with that. Now we'll go to step three, though, because everything's ready. Buyers are ready, sellers are ready, and all of a sudden, the business is actually going to be out in the market. It's trying to be sold. The seller is trying to get it done, broker working on behalf. And this is also step three. This is the first step where buyers and sellers actually interact. Up to this point, they've been kind of doing their own thing, getting themselves ready. But now buyers and sellers are going to start to come together. And this is where it gets exciting. So just to mention that. So we launch a marketing campaign, brokers do. And, we bring our bag of tricks forward. That marketing campaign is going to include some web listings. Some of you may already be familiar with places like BizQuest or BizBuySell. These are locations where businesses can be presented publicly so that buyers can take a look at them, determine if they're interested. As brokers, we have proprietary mailing lists. At Front Range Business, we have a proprietary list of 10,000 potential buyers that we're able to tap into and identify people who have demonstrated previous industry interest in a particular industry or a particular geography. And so we will use that. There also may be strategic targets. That's where, hey, you've got a particular type of business. Maybe somebody who owns a business like that is going to be interested, and we might reach out to them. But we always at this point, and this is where sellers get extremely nervous about people finding out that a business is for sale. We treat it very generically. And here's an example I would use of a generic listing. Let's say there's a company that is based in Loveland, and it makes patented plastic valves for containers. And they're used for transporting agricultural chemicals. Now, that's a pretty specific product. And if you revealed that information, any buyer doing a simple Google search would be able to turn up that company and know that that company was for sale, which is exactly what we don't want to have happen. We're protecting that business because we want that business to have the continuity and the opportunity to continue to perform without the disruption of a sale going on. So we might write an ad that says, not what I just told you, but it says, Northern Colorado plastics manufacturing business with 2 million annual sales. And if we say that, we'll get the general geography. So somebody who's looking for Southern Colorado or Denver Metro isn't necessarily going to chase that down. 2 million annual sales is going to give the size. Manufacturing business is going to give you the industry. And, that's really enough for buyers to say, I want to explore that further. But it's not enough to let the general public know. And ultimately, you don't want the general public to know that the business is for sale. So that's what we're really trying to do as we go to the market. Get it out to as many people as possible, but keep the specifics of the business under wraps at this point. Now, if we do a good job with this, and if the business is compelling, it's priced properly, it's the kind of industry that's, people are looking for, we could get an untold number of inquiries. I've certainly gotten more than 150 inquiries on some businesses. Other businesses, I may have only gotten 10. That's because of the type of business that it is, what it's going to attract. But now we have a pool of buyer candidates. And Don, talk about the buyer candidates that we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, you bet. And Don, I just want to make sure you were done on that previous slide.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, I'll just speak for myself and all the folks that are working with me here on the buy side. We're professional. We're ready. We know what we want. We're pre-qualified. And one of the things that we like is that listing that you just described. Because we are looking for something in Northern Colorado, right? I don't want to be in Colorado Springs, for example. I am looking for manufacturing. That's a fit with my skill set and my experience, and I have a network that's in that space. And then you also mentioned that it does 2 million in revenue. Well, that's important to me as a buyer. It tells me a couple things. In this particular case, I know that I'm going to have employees. It's not a one man or one lady operation. So I'm going to have some room. I'm going to have some room to hire some people and hopefully grow and scale that. So that's why we inquired about your listing, Don. But from a buy side, where do we, okay, now that we know who we are and better idea of what we want and what we can afford, well, how do we find those businesses? Public listing websites, we'll use the classic example of Biz Buy Sell, and there's 10 or 15 or 20 other sites that are like that. Brokerage firms, right? Front Range Business is a great example. But you'll find those on a national, regional, local level. Association websites. I mean, both in the industry that you're looking, we were just talking about manufacturing. So you can start doing, from a buyer's perspective, start doing research on the industry, finding their associations. Many times you can find links or help and support to people within that industry that are looking to sell. So you can just become more educated and just aware of how to find them. And even ours, like IBBA. It's got business brokers and there's access to listings there. But industry research is important. Understand what's going on there, because if you're going to dive into this process and spend that 5 to 10 hours a week, 5 is pretty standard for a buyer. They need to commit. Well, let's make sure we understand more about what it is that we're buying, because we know we're well prepared. And when we get to the finish line and we want to acquire it, we really need to have our homework done on the front end. So once we find this ad for the business that Don's describing, we're going to sign an NDA. He's going to send us a link. Every listing is going to require an NDA to be signed to protect the seller. Well, as a buyer, we have an obligation too. We need to take that seriously. We do not want to be the person to accidentally let the cat out of the bag for this business that's for sale and be the one responsible for what could happen to that business and their employees finding out, or frankly, what could be devastating for the current owner of that business, especially if we're trying to buy it. But in any case, we need to take it serious. So once we've submitted that NDA, Don is going to start sending us staged information. And this is where the education process starts. So we need to be prepared to receive and review that information. And financials is an easy place to start, right? So for me, I've always been more of a sales-oriented CEO. I care more about let's grow, let's get great people, let's go out and expand. And I've had to surround my people with, I've had to surround myself with really strong financial folks on my team. Well, you may be that kind of buyer as well, right? Whatever you're good at, operations, sales, marketing. But when Don sends us that information, we may be able to gobble it up and understand it all. But if we don't, that's okay too. Maybe you need help of a bookkeeper. Maybe you need help of a CPA. You're going to need help of a business attorney at some point to review this information for this company that we're looking to buy. So Don's going to send us a series and bits and pieces of information. We're going to gobble that up, process it, get back to Don with questions, make sure that we understand it. From a buyer's perspective, one of the worst things that we can do is assume. We get data. If we really don't necessarily know what we're looking at, we're afraid to ask questions. We make assumptions. We move ourselves right out of the process. I can't tell you how many times as a listing broker, I've had buyers come back and say, man, I did not see that through. I really kind of messed up. And that's the business that I wanted. And after I've looked at these other ones, now I know that's the one that was a really good fit for me. So it wasn't until down the road that that particular buyer finally realized the importance of taking it serious, understanding what they want, and making sure they're recognizing the data that Don's sending to them. Now we're going to engage with initial discussions, and Don's going to help us figure out if this is a potential fit for us.
Good. So we're all the way up to step 4. And so I think things have heated up. Don, I think you could say it's time to get really serious on both sides. We have buyers who are specifically asking about and qualified to acquire this business. And so sellers, it's time now to really nurture those buyer-seller relationships. So what happens here is we go into what's called the due diligence process. And Don, I think what we want to do here is flip this back to the buyer step 4.
Okay.
Because this is where buyers take the lead role starting from step 4 going forward. We're going to see that it's buyers that are really taking the lead role and sellers are supporting them from behind.
Sure, you bet. So at this point, I've been able to demonstrate that I'm serious. I want to be taken serious. This business matches what I'm looking for, and here comes that information, right? So Don is comfortable of who I am and how I'm going to pay for it, and that I'm a potential fit. So now we start the process of analyzing financial reports and seeing tax returns, and understanding, what the lease is with this particular business, or if there's property being sold that Don may have with it. We're going to start going through the sales and operating information, and we're going to be moving towards discussions with the seller where we can validate what we're learning on the front end, and ultimately line up a site visit. Right now, most businesses that are for sale, the employees are not aware of that. And so it's as buyers, we're going to have to prove ourselves to get to the point where they're comfortable letting us come and see their operations. So we need to be ready to gobble up this information Don is sending out. And then ultimately it's going to lead us to, okay, is this a business that we want to buy? No, right? Maybe it's not. It's important from a buyer's perspective that we understand the why. If this business is not a fit for us, and maybe there's multiple whys, it's important that we understand that. Don't just discard it as it's not for me. Well, why was it not for you? Why is it not for us? We need to understand that. It's going to help us on our search for the next business so we can continue to fine tune exactly what it is that we are after. And if it's not for us, we need to share that with Don, because now that we are aware ourselves, from a professional standpoint, we should let him know. It's likely Don's going to have another listing that we're going to be interested in the future if this wasn't the one for us. And we want him to remember that we're professional and that we're handling ourselves in a polite manner. Maybe, well, that's most common. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I need more information. So now it's our job to identify exactly what it is that we need, and get back in touch with Don. Some of it he can handle. Some of it we're going to need to validate with the sellers themselves and through the rest of the process that he'll let us through. And then ultimately, if it is for us and we are at a yes, then we're going to move to the offer step. Don, would you like me to go back one slide so you can handle that one?
Yeah.
Before you guys move forward, there is a question in the chat. It says, what are the typical time frames of each step?
You know what? We have a slide coming up that's going to show that.
Awesome.
So we'll
Thank
be
you.
able to cover it.
Thank you.
Yep. So Don, so let's look at the seller side of all of this. So I think Don did a really good job of showing that what the buyer's doing now is really digging in deep. And I think I see another question came up just from Justin. Can you, as the listing broker, help with the LOI? Yes. I'll answer that question, Justin. Brokers typically have tried and true templates for both an LOI, letter of intent, which is how you make your offer originally, and then later on the purchase agreement, which we'll talk about. It is okay for the selling broker to provide the buyer with a template for these documents because they're approved versions, and you will have the benefit of the advocacy of an attorney on your side to help to make sure you can move that from template to what you want it to say. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more as we go along. Okay. So the seller really is following the lead of the buyers in terms of providing the information that they might need. They might need to see the lease to determine how that's going to transition to the buyer from the seller. They'll want to see financial reports and taxes. That's to validate that the representations made about the profitability or the size of the business are true. They might want to know, how does this business operate? Who do you sell to? So you'll want to see a breakdown of who your customers are, how the revenue comes into the business. And as Don talked about, that discussion where the buyer and the seller actually sit down, meet each other, and there's a tour of the site itself. Now, the seller only has one business to sell. That's it. That's the only business. But there could be a significant number of potential buyers. So there's going to be a requirement on the seller side to, through the broker who's done a significant amount of filtering, take those best buyers and make sure the seller sees who they are. Understanding, do they have the financial wherewithal? Are they bringing any experience to the table? Are they a good culture fit for this type of business? What is their timeline to acquire? Do they want to acquire a business in 2 months or 2 years? How ready are they? Also, there might be licensing requirements for a buyer coming in, and they may have intentions for the business. And the buyer needs to be able to say, these are my intentions once I were to take over this business. And the seller needs to hear that and say, does that jive with what I want? Sellers are kind of protective of the businesses that they have nurtured and grown, sometimes for 20, 30, or 40 years. And so knowing what the buyer wants to do with it becomes important. So at this stage, we're really looking for that, prove out what we've represented and see if we have a meeting of minds between the parties. And then if we do, we're going to start seeing offers hit the table. So Don, back to you for buyer step 5.
Okay. So we've determined that we like the business for all the right reasons. And we can see ourselves, we have a vision for why this is the fit for us, that we can not only understand at our level, but we can communicate with the sellers and with Don. So the next step is we're going to put together a letter of intent. Letter of intents are non-binding. It's not a purchase agreement. But I will tell you from a coaching perspective to the buy side, you need to fully anticipate you can fulfill that letter of intent, right? Letter of intents are not meant to be placeholders. And when buyers come along and they haven't done much homework and they see something they like and they want to use a letter of intent as a placeholder, folks like Don and myself are not going to let that happen. We're going to have to prove that this is really the business for us and we are really the buyer and we can afford it and this makes sense. So we're going to put together our letter of intent, and we can get Don's help in this case. He's got a template. We can communicate to him exactly what we want. Maybe he'll give us a copy of it. Maybe he helps us put that letter of intent together. But it's going to include the sale type, right? Asset sale, stock sale, otherwise. The price that we're willing to offer and how we're going to pay for it, our source of funds. How much earnest money are we willing to put down? How serious are we? That's one of the things that's going to tell a broker, how serious are you there? If it's $1,000 or $2, that's not very serious. If it's a bigger number because we've done our homework and really confident in ourselves, That's an indicator. It's an indicator to Don. It's an indicator to his seller. Allocations, right? How we're going to handle purchase price allocations in the contract, inventory, furniture, fixture, and equipment, what the training and transition plan needs to look like from our side, from a buyer side. What are we expecting of those sellers? How much time do we need them to stay? How much hand-holding do we need them to do? You'd be surprised. That's a big part of an offer that sellers look at, and they factor in. For sellers, it's not necessarily always the biggest price. In fact, it's rarely the case. It's about all the terms that we're talking about now. It's about the structure and how we're going to put this together and ultimately acquire it and continue to be successful after we buy it. So the non-compete, we may have our own thoughts. If we're getting an SBA loan, great news. They're going to have a big opinion and they're going to tell us what that looks like. So we're also going to identify any contingencies, just like when we're buying a home, if there's lender financing, if there's a lease that has to be transferred, how we handle misrepresentations or omissions, things like that. So our goal at this stage is to negotiate our way through this, demonstrate, what we're offering and why, clarify. We need clarity. We're trying to provide clarity to the seller. And ultimately, when it's ready, we're going to sign that letter of intent that we fully intend to execute on. And we're presuming at this point, the sale will happen. If the seller signs it, we're going to lay this out. But when they sign that, that's where the work is going to begin.
Great. And that's, I think, the important point. An LOI is an offer from the buyer to the seller. They sign it, they turn it over to the seller. There'll probably be negotiation, but it's not until it's signed by the seller that you actually have something that you're going to move the transaction forward with. So the offer has got to be selected. Buyers, I know you're not going to like to hear what I'm about to say, but sellers are looking to get multiple offers, which they often do. Ultimately, you're going to be in competition with other buyers. And so just keep that in mind. We do hear about people trying to set up win-lose scenarios. You only have 24 hours to accept this offer, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller. No, that's not what you're looking to do. You're looking to set up a situation where your candidacy is perceived as the best one for the seller to act on. And so you're looking to make your offer as strong as you can make it, represent yourself as best you can, and put yourself in a position to be selected against these other competing buyer candidates. And you will be up against other buyer candidates. So I like to reinforce that. What's the seller doing? Well, the seller is taking those offers that have been assembled and reviewing them, looking at it at a personal level. Do I see this person at a personal level stepping in and building those bonds with the employees and the customers and the suppliers that I've built over time? Obviously, you're evaluating all of the deals at a technical level. Okay, what are the various prices? What are the terms and what is the deal structure? I'll give you a quick example. I'm making up a price here, $1 million. One person says, I want to give you $1 million, but I need a seller note for 300,000 of that $1 million. That seller note is money that's more at risk than actual cash on the barrelhead at closing. Somebody else might say, I'll give you 950,000, but no seller note. Don mentioned it's not always the highest price. That deal structure with that seller note versus no seller note might just push the seller over to wanting to take the lower offer. And of course, it's up to the seller to validate the buyer's financial wherewithal. As a broker, I would never let a seller take an offer from a buyer if I had not verified where the funds are coming from, talk to the lender that they intend to use, and other things that validate for us that the money is there and available. And then, negotiate some of the points back and forth. Very common, happens with most deals. But ultimately, the seller is going to sign an LOI. They're committed to signing an LOI. Couple of things, Don made a point. We are going to presume that if the seller signs that LOI and returns it back to the buyer, that sale is going to happen. And the only reason it would not happen would be if we encountered a little bit later on, the buyer encountered material facts that were improperly represented or not represented that make this business something other than what they've been told that it is. If the business continues to demonstrate it's exactly what we've been showing it is, that deal should be moving forward. Now, as the broker, I have a unfortunate task that I need to perform, and that is I need to inform the unselected buyer candidates that they were not chosen as the number one. It's a common thing. It has to be done. But again, we do it professionally, courteously. We inform the buyers of why they were not chosen. And we indicate to them that if they would like to stay in the mix with a backup offer, we would be happy to keep them in under those terms. But an LOI is only signed between the seller and one buyer. You do not enter into multiple LOIs because that's going to put you in the position of misrepresenting to a certain extent whether the buyer actually has a clear shot at getting this acquisition. And if you make a late stage change on that to them, very unethical behavior. So we don't support that. So that's what's going on. The LOI is signed. Both parties are doing it. And we move on to step 6.
All right. Extended due diligence. We're going to call this the validation stage. We're going to continue to validate what we learned on the front end and make sure that it's as true and correct as we thought it was. Ultimately, look, as a listing broker, my goal is to get all the cards on the table face up. From a buyer's perspective, you absolutely want that. That's your goal. Your goal is to figure out what you don't know as much as you can, get the cards on the table face up so you can make a well-informed decision that you can stand behind. Very, very important. Look at all the time you spent to get here at this point, okay? So we're going to validate previous representations, information that we've learned. We need to prove the transferability of value, right? And what does that mean? Well, this business was owned by Carol before, and Carol's got a certain personality and she had a certain skill set and a certain relationship with the employees, etc. Am I going to be able to come in and continue what Carol's built? I mean, how likely is that to happen? That's important for me to know as a buyer. If I have a lender, you can trust that they too will want to know how likely that is to happen. This is a phase where we could start diving into reviewing customer information, customer profiles, types of customers, average tickets, contracts, suppliers, and understanding employees. Okay. Sometimes, from a buyer side, we're gonna get an outline of the team, and we're gonna see what there's certain number of salespeople, certain number of service people, et cetera, et cetera. These are the key players. There might be a general manager or a key employee that's involved. Some sellers, depending on the buyer, also important, why we're demonstrating how professional and prepared we are. Some sellers might allow us to meet employees before closing, but not all sellers will. We need to understand that from a buyer side. And depending on how important that is for us, it's yet again, the more professional, the more prepared, the more qualified we are, the easier it is going to be to get an allocation like that, an opportunity to maybe meet a key employee, some of those things, contracts, suppliers, etc. In this phase, we're fulfilling special requests from lenders if a lender is involved. And really, it's a function of resolving contingency. So look, we know we like it. We've done our homework. We put forth an LOI that we fully intend to stand behind. Um, and now the race is on. There's a lot of work to do in this phase. We need to shore up our due diligence because we're heading straight towards a purchase agreement, which is going to be outlined in that letter of intent that we signed. So we want to formalize our lending commitment. And if you're working with an SBA lender, you're gonna get about 4 or 5. Hey, great, you're approved. You're still approved. So there's not just one approval. They too are tracking this with you. They're also confirming that they're going to ask for more financial data from Don. They want to make sure that the business didn't go from awesome to not awesome over the last 30, 60, 90 days that we've been working through this process. So we've got to formalize that lending commitment, which means we're going to have work to do for them. We've got to put a plan together for real property. Is Don selling the property with this company too? Or do we need to take over a lease? Maybe we don't love where it's located, and that could factor in. We have to look at something else, hopefully not, but we might have to actually make a move or get a different building, something like that. That in and of itself is a whole block of time that we need to prepare for. And then it may require licensure, right? Business licensure, specialty licensure. If it's an HVAC company or a plumbing company, and I'm a financial buyer, which a lot of our buyers are, I may not have a plumbing license. Well, I'm going to have a plan for that. I'm going to work with Don to figure out what that looks like. Do some of my employees have what it takes for this business to continue to operate after we buy it?
Okay, so seller is also going to be busy at step 6, just as we see on every step. You've got buyers and you've got sellers. And I think Don did a great job of explaining all the activity that the buyers have going on in this 6th step here. Sellers, this is going to be a response step rather than a leadership step for sellers. You're going to be responding to the request for more thorough documentation. You're going to be responding to the request to say that you want to talk to some of your customers. Imagine a manufacturing business like the one we mentioned at the beginning. Does it have 2 customers that buy 100% of its production? Does it have 40 customers, none of which is larger than 8% of the customers? Are any customers at risk? Are they under contract? Who are the suppliers to this business? Buyers might need to talk to those suppliers. We talked a little bit about employees. There's no specific rule that says buyers get to or don't get to talk to employees. It's a choice made by the seller. The seller typically makes that choice based on perceived risk of what kind of disruption might occur if the employees were to find out that the business were for sale. In some cases, there is no risk. In other cases, there could be significant risk. And so that's of tremendous importance, and they have to work that out. And transferability of value. The business is priced, assuming that it's going to continue to generate the kind of profits and productive value under the new owner that it had under the old owner. It's important to demonstrate why that value is indeed going to transfer. And so that goes to some of the questions up above. Are the contracts transferable? Are there things going on in the industry that are positive or negative for the future of this business? This is what everybody's digging into, and sellers, you are participating in helping to tell that truthful story as we talk about 6. Now we go to 7.
Okay, well, Don, I've done my homework. You know who I am and how I'm going to pay for it, and I'm still in the game. And as a buyer, a couple things I need to be aware of. I'm just kind of give you some rules of thumb. There's probably 50 people, if not a lot more, that have inquired about this business. And Don's done a pretty good job of packaging this up in a professional manner. So I can tell this is pretty buttoned up. I need to anticipate that I have those other folks that are like myself making their way to the top of this. And so, yes, we're under a letter of intent, but this is where I need to maintain my level of seriousness and continue the path that I've already started. So we're going to deliver a purchase agreement, right? And I'll share with you on the buy side, you need to put your best foot forward. If you're a buyer that has done all this work and you're this ready and you're this professional and your goal is to try to acquire something that you like this much, but maybe I'm just going to try to get it on the low, okay? And you wouldn't be the only one that's tried that. But the problem is if we go in without our best foot forward, we may not get a second bite at the apple. If we try to make changes to that letter of intent that are drastic, that we've put forth to LOI and to the seller after all this trust that we've built, they may not accept our purchase agreement. And there's a ticker, by the way, buyers. So when we sign that letter of intent, there's timeframes Don has put in place for us to get our stuff together, to wrap up our homework, make an informed decision, and get this purchase agreement put together. So that's where we're at now. Attorney typically involved. I'll just tell you from my side, for buyers, you're going to need one. As a listing agent, I require it. I just do. And Don and I have a long list of people that you can talk to, if nothing else, to review the documentation, the contract that you're signing. Okay. Attorneys' jobs are not in place to negotiate the terms of this. I did that as the buyer via Don with the seller. So we have put our deal together. The attorneys are there to legalize what we have agreed to. And Don does a great job of managing attorneys through that process to help them understand, attorney, that is your role. Your role is to legalize what everybody has agreed to here, not to come in and nuke this deal and blow it up and try to renegotiate. That's not how that goes. But from a buy side, we're going to need one. Okay. Don may have a boiler template we can use to get started. Take all the stuff we had in our letter of intent agreed to and put it in there. That's going to save us some time. Maybe as a buyer, I'm comfortable with that. So that's path one. I can do that. And then bring the attorney in to button up everything and make sure it's good before we sign. Or maybe I just want my attorney to put together from the ground up and to match the letter of intent and to come from my side and build it the way we want it and let Don and his seller make adjustments as they see needed. So again, we're restating, expanding on the letter of intent unless there are material changes. Hopefully there aren't many. If there are, from a buyer's perspective, we should have given Don a heads up. We should not be surprising them with things completely out of the blue in this purchase agreement, because we're going to affect the trust that we've built, and we might just miss out on the opportunity to buy this business that we've worked so hard to get. We're wrapping up final contingencies, and there is a hard earnest money option that's involved. So the further we get into this process, the more serious we are. And at a certain point, the earnest money that we've put forward is at risk if we don't do what we said we're going to do on the buy side. So we're going to negotiate the remaining details. We're going to wrap up the loose ends. We're going to sign that purchase agreement when we're ready to go. And Don, I'm going to take this back over to you so you can help us understand the sell side.
Yeah, so absolutely. So just like with step 6, seller is participating here, actively participating, but not necessarily taking the lead. The contract to purchase, the same as the letter of intent, it comes from the buyer. The seller doesn't produce the contract to purchase. The seller reviews what comes from the buyer, and then they'll get into negotiating the remaining details. I think Don did a great job talking about the consistency that's required between the letter of intent and the purchase agreement. There's a term in our industry, it's called retrading. Retrading means you make an offer to get your foot in the door, and then when it comes time to do the purchase agreement, you lower that offer, or you do something to drag it down. Nothing will be more dispiriting to a seller than to see that happen. And nothing is more inappropriate to try to pull off if you, as a buyer, if you do that, because there needs to be a material reason that something is amiss for you to change your offer. Otherwise, there was plenty of opportunity to look at that pricing and deal structure back at the letter of intent stage. And the expectation is you're staying with that unless there's a material change or some issue presents itself. In which case, buyer, if there is, you have a legitimate opportunity to put forward your rationale for adjusting the price. And it has to be a change on the business side, the seller side, not necessarily a change just in how you perceive things. But we're going to get through that. We're going to negotiate. Everybody's going to be patient. They're going to be flexible. They're going to compromise. We'll see what needs to be done. The attorneys will do a lot of this work behind the scenes because they're taking care of what Don was talking about, the legalizing the transaction. And they're going to do that. And ultimately, there is a document at step 7 because you can't get to step 8 without signing the document at step 7. And so step 7, the seller has signed it, the buyer has signed it. There is a purchase agreement in place, and we move to the second to last step of this entire process. Don?
Awesome. So great news. All the work that I have put in to get here, and I found the business that I want, and they liked my LOI, and I liked what I learned in my validation process, and everything was consistent. I met the seller, and we've got a plan. They accepted our purchase agreement, and now we're heading in towards the final phases of this. So at this point, since we've signed a purchase agreement, we're going to have closing checklists. So if you like to check boxes and have lists, you're going to love this because you're going to get a lot of that. And so if I have a bank involved, great news. If I like checking boxes and lists, because I'm going to get 2 of them. I'm going to get one from the lender who's going to keep me on track and make sure I'm getting everything ready for the financial aspect of it. And then Don, God bless him, he's got his own. So he's got a big checklist of all the things that we're going to need to do. And honestly, it's really helpful. It's helpful for me as a buyer because there's so many things that you can't keep track of all this. It's hard to come up with all the things that you don't know, questions that you need to ask. And so when you work with a professional listing agent like Don, he's going to have tools that are going to help everybody get to and through the finish line and ultimately move on to the training and transition phase. So just know that there's help involved. I'm going to lean on that. I need it because it's hard for me to remember all these little details that I have to keep track of. But between the bank and the listing agent, I'm going to have some help. So checklists, lots of those. Real property, or a lease, things like that. That's a big hill to climb. We need to be prepared for that. We're going to lean on Don for that. There's going to be a lot of communication on how that's going to transfer. And that list that he's going to give us is going to help, remind us we need to get our corporate entity established, our licensure that we need, life insurance, supplier agreements. There's a lot of details that are involved. Don and the seller are tasked with helping me, the buyer, us, the buyers, understand what that looks like so we can get those things done and ready. Because ultimately, it's going to come down to we're driving towards closing, and then we're heading to transition of this business that we just acquired. So we're going to prepare for the operational functions. We're going to review and approve the closing documents. These are things that are going back and forth. There's a lot of communication between us, the buyer, and Don, the listing agent, and the seller. There's a lot of calls. There's a lot of meetings. There's a lot of emails, Zooms. If I'm feeling uninformed, I need to ask from a buyer standpoint. But the goal is that we have clarity, right? We have transparency. We all know exactly what we need to do by a certain time. And it's as important for me, the buyer, to be getting my stuff done on time as it is for the seller. I think what we want to avoid, all of us, the buyer and the seller, is that you're racing towards closing and we're not getting things done quick enough. And it really creates a bunch of stress for everybody. It's unnecessary. And if you think about it, that stress heading to closing, writing the big check, drives us straight into, well, we just closed on a Thursday. Well, guess what? Friday, I own it. So I'm not taking a vacation on Friday. I need to be ready to go with a smile on my face because I have some new employees to meet and a seller that I'm going to have to partner with. Please think through it that way, buyers. You need to be prepared to partner with that seller as much as possible to help ensure you're going to have a successful transition. Okay. Even if you want to do things different than they do today, get as much as you possibly can. Get yourself ingrained into their environment and put yourself in a successful position. And then we're going to write some checks, and there's going to be probably a lot of those, Don. We're going to submit the funds to escrow, and that takes us here to the seller side.
Yeah, good. So once again, the reason the buyer slide came first is the buyer is really leading the activity and the seller is responding to these requests. I don't want to say it'll be an endless list of requests. It is ultimately it's finite. You get to the end of the line, but it's significant. And so they're going to be asking you questions like, who do you get your business insurance through? Because I'm going to need to have a business insurance policy ready to go on the day I take over. Who's your point of sale system with? And do I want to continue to use that or bring in a new one? Who's your workers' comp? Vehicle insurance, anything, when you close a transaction, you actually have odometer mileage statements that have to be filled out. You have to change the title. Some of those vehicles might not be paid for. There might be loans. There has to be payoff on those loans. All of those little details are part of what this closing transaction is going to require. And we make a lot of jokes about lenders and their requests for documentation and paperwork. It unfortunately is not funny. We make jokes, but it's not funny. They can ask for a lot of things that they'll surprise with how late they get to things. We've seen this before. I think a lot of lenders work on an emergency response basis rather than planning way ahead. They have plenty of time to know something's coming, but they don't ask till 3 or 4 days before closing. And all of a sudden you got to get it together. So just be aware. In a minute, we're going to talk about the closing attorney. We're going to actually introduce a third person here with the buyer and the seller, and that's the closing attorney. But the important thing is here for the seller is making sure that the closing attorney is prepared to do their job by providing them with a number of documents and things like helping to prepare settlement statements and those kinds of things. Also, just keeping an eye on whether all funds are delivered to escrow. Did the money get there? Because if the money's not there, you can't do the closing. Now, sellers, this says this is a seller's responsibility, but keep in mind, this is your broker's responsibility. Your broker is doing all of these things so you don't have to. What is the seller supposed to be doing? As much as possible, the seller is supposed to be concentrating on running the business so that transition to the new buyer can be as smooth as possible rather than chasing after paperwork. But it is something that they will participate in. Let's look at who the new player is here at level 8, and that is the closing attorney. So we talked about that both the buyer and the seller will have business attorneys who are their advocates as they put together documents and evaluate the legal, not necessarily the business, but the legal aspects of the transaction. And you should both, buyer and seller, you need to have that attorney, and it needs to be a competent business attorney not a divorce attorney, not an estate attorney, but a competent business attorney who has done this before, who understands their role in the transaction, is to help you either buy or sell, not get in the way of that by making it overly complicated or overly expensive to you as the person who has to pay for that attorney. But there's another attorney that gets involved called the escrow attorney or closing attorney. And if you've ever bought or sold a piece of real estate, you've seen that title person who comes in with a big stack of papers and everybody has to sign those. And all of those do something to make sure that that transaction is properly handled, legally handled, and all of the filings that are supposed to happen with that do. That's the same role that an escrow or closing attorney performs. I always tell people, as a broker, I'm very comfortable with that escrow attorney also being either the buyer's attorney or the seller's attorney, so long as they have experience in being a closing attorney and are competent in that role as well. It's not advocacy for either party. They do not influence the transaction in any way, shape, or form. All they do is fulfill the responsibilities associated with that transaction. So it's okay for the closing attorney to represent one or the other party, so long as they're good at what they do. And then they will have both the buyer and seller sign a document that says they're a neutral party. They're not advocates. They're serving for both, and they're serving the transaction itself. So that's the role, just letting you know that. They are going to put together all of the instructions, the structured process that the closing will go through. Set of instructions is a list of all the documents that are there to be signed and all the actions that have to happen. They are going to, in their escrow role, they're going to receive all the funds from the lender, funds from the buyer. The brokers might be holding the earnest money. They're going to turn that over to the escrow attorney. But all of those funds are going to be received. And then all of those funds are going to be distributed back out to the parties that are participating in this based on their role. Some funds might go to pay off loans on the business or pay off loans on the vehicles. Some funds might go to the broker as a commission. Some funds might go to the seller. There are any number of places those funds go, but they need to be specifically identified and transferred. And that's done through the settlement statements. And it's done through the escrow attorney. The seller is not holding the money at this point. The buyer is not holding the money at this point. The lender is not holding the money at this point. The escrow attorney is. And the escrow attorney is working on everybody's behalf. Escrow attorney is also going to make sure there aren't any liens on the business. And they're going to, so that the business can, in fact, be transferred from one owner to another. And they're going to prepare all kinds of documents, corporate resolutions, trade name changes, bills of sale, non-competes. There might be a lender or promissory note. And they're going to make sure that all of this documentation takes care of every little detail that's required for this to be a valid transaction, including filing with Secretary of State that these changes have been made and other things. So a closing attorney, probably the best value in this transaction. They don't charge a significant amount. We see numbers like $3,000 to $5,000, typically split between the buyer and the seller, each paying half. And for that fee, you get to put a stamp of approval, accuracy on the transaction so that it will transfer ownership successfully. Really important. So that's attorney 8. That's the closing of the transaction. And we go to step 9. And we're back to the buyer.
Well, again, this is where the work goes in. And this is also why it was important that we had a we were well prepared heading up to closing. We did our part. We maintained trust with the seller because now the rubber hits the road. So we've written the check and we closed on a Thursday and we own it as soon as we just closed on it. And so now we need to transition into our new company, to our new business. And so there it is again. I can't emphasize it enough. Buyers, please prepare yourselves to partner with the seller. Again, you're going to have your own vision, your own ideas. You're going to want to make changes. It happens every time. It's best to start with what's been working and understand that instead of you don't want to upset the apple cart too much. That's the last thing you need when you're trying to go in there and get your hands around everything that's going on. So now we're going to hire and engage with employees depending on the type of sale, right? So let's say we'll go back to this manufacturing example, and it's an asset sale. So we purchased it that way. Well, our seller, turns out they're actually going to have to on paper terminate their employees at the end of that sale, right when we closed. So the seller's going to be responsible for paying them all their wages and vacation pay, whatever that those responsibilities are. The seller's going to handle that. Well, now, and we knew this already because of all the awesome checklists that Dawn and the lender gave us, but we knew that we need to hire all these employees. Because the employees don't want to feel like they just got fired and have to go through this whole thing. They just want to know everything's cool. Like they're still going to get paid, like their benefits, or whatever that is. We want to make that seamless for them. So we're going to engage with the employees and try to make their lives as easy as possible. And we've probably already started work on preparing for utility services and licenses. And, Don mentioned the vehicles and all that. That's going to be handled at closing. That closing attorney's dealing with all that. And so we're going to have to get the vehicles done. We had to have insurance for all these things in place. But now that we're on the end, now we're going to start engaging with the customers, right? That internal and external. So the employees and the folks that we're providing product services to who are paying the bills around here, our distributor partners. And we need to receive training. Again, I'm going to go back to the top. It's why it's so important that we're partnering with that seller. We need to know what they know. We need to know how they've done it. We want to set ourselves up for success. So, and then at this point, if there's any seller note that was part of our transaction, that too would have been structured and we would have written off on that. We're, preparing from a schedule standpoint on how we're going to be making seller notes in addition to an SBA loan if we've got that, or however our financing strategy is unfolding.
Great. And sellers, just like buyers, that partnering is super important. It is a wonderful moment in time when you close the transaction, you click the champagne glasses, and everybody celebrates. But there is work still to do. The employees no longer work for you. You need to make that official by terminating them. Good news is they're going to get hired by, they're not being let go. Buyer training and support. I talk about this, and it's super important. Seller, especially that sort of strategic training and support. A lot of the operational things, they're actually going to get trained by the employees themselves. The employees are often the best users of the point of sale system or the scheduling system or other things. The owner that may not be their day-to-day, what they've been concentrating on. But you're going to be looking at a lot of big picture questions about the business and opportunities. Why should I continue this advertising? Should I let it go? Your opinion, seller, about what has been beneficial to the business and made it successful will continue to be shared at this stage. And it's really, really valuable for that buyer. You want the buyer to be as successful as possible. So all of your input is really useful here. So that's that training and support you're providing. And then personal guarantees. Along the way, you could have signed for various things that you have personal guarantees associated with, whether that's on the lease or whatever. You're going to want to be taking yourself off. If there's some sort of on the utilities, your name is on it somehow, some way, or something with the landlord. You just want to look for all of those and use this time to get yourself out of everything you can. Some businesses sell and there are accounts receivable. Those accounts receivable go to the seller, even though they're received after the buyer has taken over, because the seller delivered those goods, incurred the costs of those goods being delivered. So accounts receivable, you're going to want to be making sure that as those come in, they flow to you. WIP is a term called work in progress. Let's just think of it as you're a manufacturing company and you have a lot of half-built things on the production line. The seller has incurred some cost to get that done. The buyer is going to incur some cost to get that out the door. You need to negotiate between the parties what that is. That's usually done in advance. That's in your contract. But you need to make sure that as those products are sold, that money comes to the seller at whatever level you've done. And of course, collect the seller note payments, if any. So you're working together, but the reality is, buyer, you're running the show. Seller, you're supporting the show. And let's just look at a few wrap-up slides that we've got, Don.
Yeah.
So we had a question early on about timing. How long do these take? There's no specific amount of time, but we've seen that initial exploration, buyer, seller, are they ready? Can be days or years, before somebody is ready to go with that. Listing and market prep, depending on the complexity of the business, you can decide once a listing agreement is signed, you might be able to get a business out in the marketplace in 2 weeks, but you might also take 2 months because it's a complex story. It's a comprehensive set of documents that need to be assembled, and it's just needing to get things cleaned up and ready. Once you go on the market, if you have priced the business properly, if you've taken it to the right market candidates who will be looking as potential buyers for that business, I think we can see getting letters of intent sometime within 30 days and 60 days, 1 to 2 months. And so, Carol, I see your question, and I will be answering that in just a second. So that's good. Purchase agreement to close. 2 weeks, again, 2 weeks, 2 months. Nobody wants to dawdle at this point. Everybody wants us to move as fast as it can. But the more complex a business is, and the more due diligence that's required to get to closing, it can be several months to get that done. So overall, 3 months, absolute minimum from listing agreement to close. Absolute minimum. 4 to 8 months, I think Don would agree that's something we see pretty common, especially that 6, 7, 8 month kind of thing. But hey, it might be 12 months. So it's important to recognize that this is the time that you should expect as a seller and you should expect as a buyer for a transaction like this to happen. I want to go back to the question that Carol had. I think she was asking about allocations. And Carol, when a business is sold, the entire selling price of the business has to be allocated to categories. One of those categories might be inventory. So let's say it's $1 million business. The business might have $100,000 in inventory. So 100,000 of that $1 million purchase price is spoken for. Another one might be furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And so some businesses have very little equipment. Some businesses have a lot. We'll make up another number, $150,000, because this business has some trucks, has some heavy equipment. So another $150,000 of that business is allocated. Now there's $750,000 that is not allocated. There are a couple smaller things that show up, things like an allocation for non-compete or an allocation for training. Those are going to be relatively small numbers, $5,000, $10,000, maybe in the allocation itself. The balance of the allocation is almost always in goodwill. That's what we're going to see the balance being. Goodwill, we didn't get into it today. We have programs on August 8th. Our program is about valuation and why businesses are valued the way they are. Our program on August 15th is a deeper dive into LOIs and contracts and closing and what gets included in those steps. So can't really cover them today, but we certainly look forward to doing that. And so this will give you an idea of timeline. We had a follow-up question about LOI to purchase agreement. We try to make that happen in just a couple of weeks, if we can, sometimes 30 days to get the attorneys and get everybody working on it. Let's go back to that slide just before this one. Final takeaways. Don, maybe you could run through these, just to hit on them at a high level.
Sure. Let me move my little Zoom screen here. So regardless of the type of the size of business, process is similar. We are the experts in the process. The seller is the expert in their business. And our goal is to try to help the buyer become as educated as possible. But the process is similar. We use that and it's tried and true. Both parties have got to be committed to meeting their obligations. So I'm going to go back to the, why sell? Why right now? Why business ownership? Why right now? The alignment is critical from timing and motivation. Buyers and sellers have their own respective responsibilities throughout. Everybody's got to take it serious. It's a marathon, friends. This does not happen quick. That's why you're going to lean on us. And we're going to show you the process. Our job is to help everybody see what's coming next, what's around the corner, eliminate surprises. But it goes back to that. The brokers do much of the heavy lifting. I said earlier in our presentation, we actually spend more of our time with the buyers. So look, I mean, candidly, we're hired and paid by the sellers, right? That's our client. But we are to be helpful to these buyers and to bring the right buyer and the right seller together. And so, some sellers, we just need everybody to understand that's the process, right? So we ultimately spend most of our time with the buyers, vetting them, helping them, trying to get the right people to the finish line. So we have that, that good ending that everybody's looking for, a right buyer, right seller. Lots of T's and I's to be crossed and dotted through these 9 steps. All businesses go through this same process. Selling and buying can be frustrating. It can be time consuming. Our job is to make this process as easy for the seller and buyer as possible. We want a great experience for everybody. It can be exhausting. I just closed one yesterday and the sellers were just worn out. God bless them. They're 70 years old. But at the end of it, they said, hey, we never could have gotten through this without your help, without the process, without guiding everybody through it. So we can show you the way to get there. Selling and buying can be, I apologize. Stay calm and focused. That's it. But Don, here's your biggest point that you say a lot, and it's so true. Deals move at the speed of trust.
Yeah, that's we can't emphasize that enough. Building that relationship between all of the players, attorneys, buyers, sellers, brokers, lenders. The more we fulfill each other's requirements and work together as a team, the more successful we're going to be. So, Don and Dawn, our 2 presenters today, we were certainly glad to be here. We were happy to be able to present for you. You will get a copy of this slide deck. It will be sent out to you automatically from the SBDC, from Larimer SBDC, and we thank them for sharing that. There's information in that slide deck about how to contact us. We welcome hearing from you at any time. We love talking to sellers. We love talking to buyers. We can help lay the groundwork for getting started, or we can jump in wherever you happen to be in this process. So I want to thank you very much for being with us today. Great questions. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully on our next show on August 8th and August 15th.
Thanks so much, Don and Don. We really appreciate this. That was a lot of very, very valuable information. Everybody online has signed up for next week's presentation on valuations. So I've just sent the Zoom link in the chat so that you can take a look at that. As Don mentioned, I will be sending the PowerPoint out. I'm also going to send the recording of this video out. It'll take a couple hours to download, but I will get that all to you by end of day. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Great to
Have a
see you.
great
Thank
day.
you, everyone. Really enjoyed it.
Bye-bye.